All right. Well, folks are going to keep on hopping on, but we're at the top of the hour. So I think we'll go ahead and get started and just let people join in as they can. And I just love looking around the room and seeing all your smiling faces from around the United States. It just makes my heart happy. And so I just want to say welcome to our August training event on Marketplace Connections. And as you know, last month's event, we focused on partnering with pastors, and we had many of our amazing CMI team leaders share insights and best practices for engaging with pastors. And that was such a great event with so many amazing takeaways. So in case you missed it, we want to encourage you to visit our YouTube channel and check it out, because I promise you, you won't be disappointed. So with these events, we always aim to use them to provide as much value and offer as many solutions as possible. So on our monthly calls, Carl and I have heard many of you expressing interest in understanding how to engage in the business sector. So today we're going to shift gears a little bit, and we're going to explore the realm of marketplace connections and effective engagement with business leaders. And we have a great lineup of influential speakers for today's event, including Mike Sharrow and Bruce Wilbanks and Carl Caton. And following Mike's presentation, there's going to be a Q&A session where you can pose any questions that you might have for Mike. And then after that, we'll hear from both Bruce and Carl. And then following Carl's presentation, we'll conduct another Q&A session, providing you with the opportunity to address any questions that you may have for Bruce or Carl. I also want to make you aware that we are recording the entire session, and then we'll be uploading that to our YouTube channel. And this means that you're going to be able to revisit any parts of the event that you'd like to review. And then we'll also be making the slide decks from today available to you in our Slack workspace following the event. And so before we begin today, we always want to begin with prayer. So today we have Tom Prichard from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and he's going to be leading us in prayer. So Tom, whenever you are ready.
Thank you. Well, let's pray. Father in heaven, we come to you today and we thank you for the many blessings you shower upon us. And we thank you for the work you've called us to, promoting and strengthening marriages. And we invite you to be with us, that you would speak to us through the speakers, give them wisdom and insights to share. And may we have ears to hear, and just guide and direct our conversation, and may you use it to further your work in our cities and communities and counties, and may you be glorified. And just be with us now, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you for praying, Tom.
Sure.
So first up on our agenda is Mike Sharrow, and Mike serves as the president and CEO of C12 Business Forums, the global leader in CEO owner peer advisory groups for Christians, and serving more than 3,300 members across the US, Southeast Asia, and Brazil. And Mike leads an HQ team here in San Antonio that supports more than 150 full-time C12 chairs who serve as missionpreneurs, helping CEOs, entrepreneurs, and key players build great businesses for a greater purpose to advance the gospel in the marketplace. C12 members employ nearly 1 million people around the globe and embrace a business as a ministry operating paradigm across all industry sectors. And Mike joined C12 initially as a member himself in 2010, after previous roles in F50, financial services, management consulting, and nonprofit context before serving as CEO in 2016. He's a graduate of Trinity International University in Deerfield, Illinois, and he's married to Jackie since 2002, and he's the father of 3 girls. And I've had the privilege of watching some of Mike's talks on YouTube, and I really will just tell you, I can't wait for you to hear from him. So without further delay, Mike, whenever you are ready.
Well, thanks, Steph. I prefer low bars of expectation. So the biggest thing that you failed to hear was I'm a friend of Carl Caton. So he makes me a better person, better husband, better father, better follower of Jesus. And so it's fun to get to join him in such an important conversation. In fact, Him and I were just chatting privately, honestly, about 10 years ago, almost to this month, him and I did some collaborating on this idea of the marketplace and marriage ministry that actually has created ripples and waves into much what I'm going to share with you today. I am in San Antonio, but I'm an Alaskan by heritage. So I'm going to spare you the translucent reflection and glare off my skin by using some slides to help illustrate some points here. So let me see if I can get that part working and lead us through a conversation. Can I get a thumbs up from Steph? Is the slide showing okay? Okay. So I want to brief you on some ideas around marriage ministry in the workplace and things we have learned and are finding and seeing around working, particularly with executives and business owners, but then what they're doing with their teams. And at the end, we've got just a list of some different ideas of things that I think could be engaged in any city around the country. Now I'm going to start a little context. This is me as my wife. I'm a girl dad. I'm a minority in a sorority, as I like to say. This means I know way too much Jane Austen. I can sing the songs of Frozen poorly, and I've worn a tutu too many times. But this is my life here. And a key part of my passion for this particular subject, and part of what got me and Carl connected so long ago, is both my wife and I come out of families that were riddled with divorce. In fact, when we were dating, one of the least romantic dates I took my then girlfriend on, we went to a Denny's and I said, "Hey, Jackie, I like you, you like me. We love each other. We obviously think there's some sort of future, but like, look at our family trees. Look at the probability metrics of our extended families. And what in the world do we think we're doing getting married? Because I don't think we're any smarter, more sincere, love each other more authentically, or have better intentions than so many of the wonderful people in our family who ended up miserable. But frankly, I'd rather never get married than end up in a miserable marriage." And so that was my confession, anxiety, cynicism was actually the launching point for my wife and I into kind of intense premarital counseling and books and assessments. And God really took what was my total fear and forged an early passion for marriage ministry. In fact, the first mission trip we ever did as a couple was doing love and respect conferences in another country. And it's just continued to be a common theme of our pursuit. So I appreciate every one of you, the work you're doing in your cities. This is so phenomenally critical. And it's from a deep place of personal passion. I want to share some things we're doing in the business world. So context, I'm going to briefly get overview of like, what's the arena I'm seeing this stuff in, and then share some insight tools and models. So I lead a business called C12. Our mission is to just uniquely work with Christian CEOs and business owners on helping them build a great business, but to do it for a greater purpose. And when we say that, it's not just a self-actualizing of like, what do you want to be when you grow up? What makes you feel better? When we say greater purpose, we really mean this idea of viewing business not just as an economic engine to fund ministry, but business as a ministry, that God cares about what we do, how we do it, why we do it, the way we do it, the motives we have, and what it produces in us in the process. And so that macro idea is a driving force of what we do. And I'll share some more examples of that, but that's the big idea. So I get to work just with men and women who run businesses who at least identify as followers of Jesus and are intrigued by this idea. And then we take them on a journey of figuring that out from a kind of formational theory of change perspective. This would be kind of the big idea here. And that is that we try to draw people together with pulling what are typically dealt with in three separate circles and making them come together in one unified one. So this idea of, hey, if you're running a business, how do you know you're actually honoring God in that? And it's easy to look to Colossians 3 and different passages and say, hey, embrace your work as worship. But I've surveyed literally thousands of CEOs across the country. And when I ask them, hey, you're a follower of Jesus, so what about the way you run your business honors God? I typically get a moral ethic of do no harm. I don't do bad stuff. I try to be as integrity and good as possible. And then maybe there's some symbols of faith or some kind of faith flexing, but then it's kind of an enigma of, well, I don't know, what would I do there? And then the idea of, hey, you were wired to make an eternal difference in this world. And the greatest asset you have in business is not your checkbook. It's actually your influence over people and families and society and culture. and help make this world a better place. And what if your business isn't a barrier to ministry or even just a funder of ministry, but is the context of ministry? And then this idea of Mr. and Mrs. CEO, how do I help you know that God cares about who you are, not just what you do? And that St. Augustine said that one of the greatest ills in a Christian life is misordered loves. And frankly, most leaders get in business struggle with idolatry of business and workaholism. When you then combine it with an eternal perspective, that can actually just be an additional cocaine for excess and abuse at the neglect of their soul, at the neglect of their marriage and family. And so you can end up with a lot of Christian jerks who write big checks. And what we are trying to do is say, can we pull those three issues together? Can we tackle the pragmatism of business with the eternal perspective of ministry and the accountability to shape and form the whole person in one context? And so that's kind of the space we live in. And we find that when we pull those things together, the disequilibrium of those things actually becomes a formational and discipleship catalyst that, frankly, that's the frontier of change for leaders. So the way we do that, for context, in case you find us in your city, we are going to usually be operating in groups. We call them forums that are professionally led by full-time chairs. We're in about 130 US cities and about 25 international cities. So we're going to do these. We're doing basically a professional small group meeting with a rigorous set of content and such. We're doing executive coaching. We get a bunch of resources. We do some periodic conferences, and we do a lot of assessment exercises. So that's kind of the space we're in. And one of the macro tools we're helping a leader think through is, how does their identity as a follower of Jesus create an integrated stewardship imperative to say, how is the kingdom of God manifest and reflected in the culture of the company, in the way you do sales and marketing, in the way you make your widgets, in the way you manage your finances, in the way you hire, fire, and care for people? And how does ministry factor into the business? We would say you're a follower of Jesus, then you are a disciple making disciple, and you're a minister of the gospel. And the question is, how are you being those things in your business? And we begin to do learning, assessments, training, and equipping around all those things every year. Now, a part that begins to be one of the catalyst tools for change is we actually kick off every single forum day with this quick check-in process. And they'll now do it in a digital app, and we'll actually have trending by month, by year, with red, yellow, green color coding and such, of how are you doing the last 30 days at these domains of your personal life. We're going to get into your business in a second. We're going to get into enterprise impact. But first, let's start with you as a leader and wanting to help them realize that nothing else you're doing for God matters if you're neglecting these things in God and in Christ. And so at the very top here is, how's your marriage? How's your role with your family? And we work our way around that wheel. And once a year, in fact, in December, I think in the materials you got in advance, we do this audit that would actually put the questions and the prompts and the criteria behind all those domains. And every leader would then set goals, quarterly goals and annual goals for each one of these areas to say, hold me accountable. When I say this is a 9, it better mean this. If it's a 5, it's because of that. Just the biofeedback of having a regular time where someone puts this in, it is remarkable how many times I've had a CEO come to a meeting for the first time, kind of got their guard up, got their posturing. We're not a networking group, we're not a sales group, so they're uncomfortable by the transparency, and making them fill this out and look at it, causing people to weep. This itself is a catalyst moment that begins to change the mental awareness that, okay, how I am is as important as what I do. So that'll be powerful for some insights we've discovered. For context, we have 2 less little pieces just to be aware of how we do these things, because it'll give insight to the tools and patterns we're finding. So since the time we're stepping up my bio, some things have changed a little bit. So we're a bunch of US cities, predominantly major metro areas, actually just shy of 4,000 members. And she said part of what's cool about that is because we're helping them think about their whole business as a platform for ministry, then really more exciting to me than what kind of revenue or profits they have, even though our members will do $800 million worth of giving and all radical sorts of generosity is they've got employees. And they're not just employees, those employees have spouses and children, and they've got customers and vendors and suppliers and business park neighbors. And so the average small to medium business in America, we've done an assessment with thousands of them where we have them quantify these different kind of demographic mission fields they've got: employees, families, candidates, customers, vendors, neighbors. The average small medium business will deal with about 5,000 to 8,000 people every year. And so our members right now are having human interaction through their business with 10 million people a month. And 70+% of those are not connected to a local church. And so we calculate that to then activate and vision cast them on what are you doing with that unique mission field you got? How are you shepherding those humans? And one of the things we help them think through is the different ways they can do ministry in their business. This is a tool one of our members actually helped us develop years ago called a caring matrix. And the idea is starting up in the top left and working our way to the bottom right. Because a common phenomenon for Christians in executive roles is to leverage their personal wealth to go do phenomenal things for the kingdom. Bible translation, wells in Africa, sponsoring children, phenomenal stuff, helping people in the name of Christ, oftentimes very, very far away, but sometimes not seeing the opportunity zones right in front of them. And sometimes even breeding bitterness because you got people suffering in their own teams, knowing that the owner may fund things out there, but their own people are not in that aperture. And we begin to say, hey, if you start with loving people physically in your team, and then emotionally and relationally, it gives you permission and credibility as you then address the deepest need they have, which is the relationship with Jesus Christ. And as you begin to involve them in that without discrimination, their passion to join you in serving their customers, their peers, their community, it creates a cascading wave. And so that's some of the big drivers. So we've got hundreds of ministry models of how to help people think about these different kind of categories and domains. But obviously the universal one being issues of relational wellness, areas of marriage and family. And that gets pretty darn exciting. In terms of what are we seeing with this? We use a lot of acronyms sometimes in C12. So let me unpack hopefully the only one I'll use today is SVA. For us, that means spiritual value add. So just to kind of break this down to what we're seeing, the average small business we serve in America will see 4 to 7 people come to Christ every year. In mature markets, it's actually closer to 10, but that's wild. So we'll see thousands, anywhere between 6,000 to 10,000 people a year making decisions for Jesus Christ in their workplace, plus thousands more who get reconnected to a local church. We'll then launch discipleship programs within those businesses. So we'll typically see 30 to 40 people being discipled through formal workplace-based discipleship programs. These businesses will then begin doing ministry programs in their city separate from the owner's tithing and giving and personal philanthropy, often $200,000 to $400,000 a year on average. That typically will do about 8 to 10 times what a normal business would do, but not doing it for the PR or the marketing or the big picture, just doing it because they view their business as a platform of the gospel. And then if you've been in church world a while, I spent 4 years on staff at a church, you'd know that a very small percentage of American Christians particularly ever actually communicate the gospel or express the gospel with a chance for someone to respond. And that is true of our incoming members, but it is wild the percentage of folks who, once they've been in C12 a year or two, evangelism and discipleship is just part of their life, not because we have a checklist that says you must, but because it just becomes an identity embedded in their vocation. And this second to last stat there is the one that has just blown us away, because we're not a marriage ministry. And yet 89%, we survey this every year. We survey about 2,500 of our members. And when we say, how's it done to your profitability? What has C12 done to your strategic planning, your culture? We've impacted all those things. The second highest rated thing it does is it'll say it transformed my marriage. I think about, I was speaking at Texas A&M University a few years ago, and a young lady who's a finance student came up to me and she said, "Thank you for your talk, Mr. Sharrow. I want to let you know that C12 has just changed my life." And I went, "Well, I think you're exaggerating. We just met. I just gave a little talk. I don't think it's actually been that life-changing yet. And she said, no, it's really changed my family back. And I said, well, again, we only work with CEOs and business owners. So I don't think we probably changed your life. You're probably confusing me with something else. And she said, no, my dad runs a big company and we're very involved in our church. And I always knew growing up that my dad was very important and he gave a lot of money. And at church around the city, he was known for being someone who was changing the world. People oftentimes tell me, you must be so proud your dad is changing the world. And she said, but growing up until as a teenager, my mom and sisters and I used to say, we know he is, we just wish we were part of the world. That frankly, the world he's changing, we're not in the aperture, we're not in the frame on that. And she said, but in high school, my dad joined one of your C12 groups and he came home one day and apologized and began to actually see us as part of his ministry and that we weren't just a collateral damage or a sacrifice to go change the world. And that changed our family. And she's like, and it took me from resenting my dad's business to me wanting to be in business because I now view business as a way to help more people experience what my family's experienced the last few years. And so that's part of the formational piece we're having. So why? Let me get into some insights, and I hope this explodes your imagination for what can happen in your city. In 2017 and 18, we worked with our friends at Prepare and Rich. You're likely familiar with their premarital assessment tool. That was most kind of their feather in their cap. They've done some obviously marriage enrichment exercises as well. My wife and I went through their premarital assessment tool back in 2002. We engaged with them and used their couple checkup tool to do some studies. We actually looked at our chairs, these full-time coaches that we have in cities, and then we surveyed a couple hundred members to see what are some of the marriage themes that we could then begin to target content and training around to address marital health in our forums. We were already doing things like promoting Weekend to Members, and we have a partnership with Family Life Ministries to encourage scholarshiping towards retreats for employees and the art of marriage and things like that. But we're like, I wonder if we could get a little bit more sophisticated. So we did this study, and the data came back. This is the macro data here rolled up. And just to explain, what are you seeing? Well, my friends at Parent Rich called me and they got the data and they said, you know what? This is really surprising to us. This is the worst data we've seen apart from pastors. What? They said, well, yeah, we've kind of known like this phenomenon happens in pastoral relationships. We didn't really think about it in the Christian executive space, because what you see here, these two green bars that are exceptionally high, way above the norm, is the areas of spiritual unity, spiritual maturity. This means they go to church, they read the Bible, they have maturity enough to know what they should do, and they care about what God says. And they've got financial security. So Christian executives are not dealing with credit card debt and figuring out how to pay their rent. So they're not having the typical inflammation issues of financial insecurity that is such a common adjutant for marital distress. In fact, they're so the opposite that it creates a phenomenon that we started calling artificial buoyancy. And that is that it hoists the tent pegs up so high, it actually masks and creates an artificial tolerance for suboptimal marital and relational wellness factors in all the other categories. Because in all the other categories, they're actually inferior to the norm. The blue bars there, the 40% for communication, the 38% for conflict, that growth area is the positive spin on saying they ain't so good at that. And this is men and women with typically 25 years of marriage or more. 70% of them are elders and deacons in their churches. And what you find is they're not fighting, but they're not thriving. In fact, many of them are barely surviving, but they've got such high moral conviction to stay together and to be the good husband and wife at church. And man, we're making such a difference in the world. And we've got a good life in terms of security and comfort, that they actually accept a lower baseline of communication, of intimacy. And the other, if you're familiar with their tool, it's actually got a few other categories of domains, from roles, responsibilities, and parenting and leisure and all these other things. This was a gut punch to us to go, the Christian executive space is actually tied with other Christian leaders for artificial buoyancy. And what does it look like to begin to pierce the veil of that and to begin to debunk that this is okay? That my friend Mindy Caliguire in the world of soul care would say, leadership has sacrifices. Any of you who are leading things on leadership has cost and there is sacrifice, but that Jesus never intended for the sacrifice to be your own soul. And I don't believe he called for it to be the marriages of our leaders. But the reality is neglect of marriage and Sabbath are really the two sins that the American church has made acceptable in the name of hustle, impact, and giving. I've got a person on my board who is one of the top financiers of Bible translations in the world. Him and his wife give a couple $1 million a month to fund some of the most noble kingdom endeavors in our planet. But he would also tell you that because he's such a great giver, he's never once been questioned at his local church for neglecting his family, for being a workaholic, for traveling too much, for not being involved in making disciples. There's kind of a pass given, like, yeah, you probably should, but you're so generous. And we kind of stroke and pet folks and thank them for what they're doing. And so we've allowed a culture that says, if you are not called to be a pastor, if you're one of those second-class citizens who happens to be in business, then by all means, make as much money for the kingdom as you can. And if you're giving that money away, which very few are actually being actually generous, but if you're giving significant dollars away, we're not even going to question your marital priorities, your family and home stewardship, your soul well-being, or challenging those other areas of following Jesus. And one of the most sobering passages for me in the entire New Testament is 1 Peter 3:7, where not only does Peter challenge me that I need to be compassionate to my spouse, but then has one of the very few times that God would ever threaten to not listen to me, where it'd say, lest your prayers be hindered, lest your prayers not be heard. And I wonder how many leaders we have in businesses attending local churches, crying out to God with wonderful prayers for impact and flourishing and prosperity and all sorts of things, that are actually finding spiritual consternation because they serve a God who goes, and here's one of my I actually think the God of the universe is loaded. I don't know what you guys think about God, but I actually am pretty convinced God is wealthy and God doesn't actually need my money or your money. I don't think God is up there wringing his hands going, man, if Susan could just get that liquidity event and I could get a 10% cut of her sale, that would enable me to do all the things I've been wanting to do for thousands of years. I don't think God needs anything. And I certainly don't think he wants or is honored by people sacrificing souls and sacrificing the most important things in life on the altar of funding the kingdom. And so this is one of the kind of ubiquitous issues that we find suppressing marital wellness within our community and across your cities and my city. So what are we doing about it? Well, you guys got links to this in advance. If you didn't get it, we'll get it to you. You can have copies of it. We've done some curriculum. So in our format, every month in these forums, these gatherings, we'll go through executive content on all sorts of business issues, finance and marketing and strategy. But we also always do something around ministry in the business. And so two that were just disruptive that came out of this insight was we did a piece on the marriage of the leader, and actually challenging the idea that the way a leader pursues marriage is a testimony to their workplace. And that most Americans are coming out of non-nuclear, non-traditional families. And if they were together, they likely were not Christ-centered and vibrant. And what's the testimony of a leader modeling healthy pursuit of family, healthy pursuit of their spouse, how they talk about them, how they invest in them, celebrating rather than concealing when they're involved in counseling and courses and workshops and assessments. And so did some significant pieces here, and also calling out that it is not cool. I met with a leader in South Carolina once who was doing incredible things for his business for God. And when I asked him about his marriage, he said, honestly, we're kind of strained. My wife resents what I do. And she's asked, we got some trouble going on with our teenage son, and she really feels like I should spend more time with her and him right now. And I said, well, why don't you? And he said, because I'm putting God first and my business first. And I said, you're an idiot. And he went, what? And he was looking for an attaboy. He's like, but look what I'm doing. And I said, do you think God is honored by you sacrificing your first ministry for all this? Like, you're an idiot. And well, everyone else says it's cool. And this led to a sobering wake-up call to get some first loves rightly ordered. And then we did some stuff around how do you actually begin to do marriage ministry in the workplace? How do you begin to view your workplace not as just a place to create funds or advertise your local church, but actually as a place where you, as a supervisor, have an opportunity to shepherd the well-being relationally of those God's entrusted to your care. And as we did work in there, here's just some crazy stuff. Actually, Carl helped me do a gathering 10 years ago with Gary Rosberg. And we did a little gathering of a couple dozen business owners, and we were talking about the economics of marital distress, the seasonality, the patterns of when do people begin to resign from their marriages, and when do divorces most likely get filed, and what's the correlation, and when people are going through that, the likelihood of them withdrawing from church communities, perhaps even, and being more isolated, but they're coming to work, and what are the percentages of marital distress at any given time. So we gave a bunch of stats, and frankly, Gary did a great job. Carl was passionate, and most of the business owners were cynical. They went, "Nah, I think that's not my town, not in my business." And one of the owners who was present said, "Man, I just can't believe, I know my people. We do company barbecues and cookouts. I know my team. I mean, I'm sure they're not all doing great, but there ain't people about to get divorced in my company." And so I said, "Well, why don't you just test the theory?" So he went back and called an all-staff meeting, and he just shared, "Hey, my wife and I've had marriage problems. We've gone to counseling, done stuff, and I just heard some statistics that there's probably people even in our room who might, if that's you, I just want to offer on Thursdays, we're going to start doing a little lunch and learn. I'm going to throw a DVD of Love and Respect on, and we're going to have a chance to discuss some marriage principles if that's interesting to you." 25 employees. Thursday, 19 of those employees came to the lunch and learn on marriage. Blew him away. Never had that kind of voluntary engagement on a ministry type topic before. Good discussions. Got done. Was like, "Hey, I felt need. Cool." His top sales guy comes to his office, knocks on the door, comes in, closes the door, and says, "Boss, I'm grateful for that lunch and learn. I just need to let you know, I just felt convicted. My wife and I are actually getting divorced right now. We actually got paperwork filled out. We're going through the process. I want to let you know, I kept it a secret because I can't afford to lose my job, particularly going through a divorce. And I'm not going to let it affect me. And don't worry, I'm not going to miss any work, and I'm not going to let it get in the way." And then the next day, another employee came. He found out 2 of his key people had divorces in process, and nobody knew. And the owner leaned in and said, "Man, like, how do I help? I'll get you counseling. I'll get chaplains involved. I'll connect you to a local church." And he journeyed with them. And a few months later, those 2 employees came in and tore up their divorce papers in his office and said, "Because of this place, our family's continuing." And I've gone to some of their annual banquets and met these employees. When you say, "Hey, why are you still here?" They're like, "Well, it saved my marriage," literally. And he became a believer. And so we began realizing there's such phenomenal opportunity to actually deploy marriage resources in workplaces, and really tried to begin elevating for these leaders and for those that serve that did not consider just the fact we're not getting divorced as being a success in marriage any more than just not going bankrupt would be accepted as a successful definition in business. So with that, a couple of things I want to, back to the data we saw, do not confuse leaders who are well engaged in a local church and have financial prosperity and have spiritual knowledge, have biblical maturity in at least knowledge in church engagement, with meaning that there's a correlation to their marital vitality. We've actually found those to be completely uncorrelated. In fact, the greater sometimes money is a success and church engagement is high, can actually lead to them just pushing aside and not dealing with the other fundamentals of marriage, and then taking that same pattern and applying it in their businesses. I also want to say the big revelation for us is, what if the workplace isn't just a place where you can create awareness to a seminar or a church or a place to raise funds, but what if the workplace is a 21st century multi-site venue? There's a business guy out in Yakima, Washington, who wrote a book where he posed the question, what would change in the American church if pastors didn't view management level and executive leaders in their congregation as merely high capacity volunteers or high net worth giving potential, but as the campus pastors of multi-site mission outposts that just happen to be hospitals and technology companies, engineering companies, construction companies, what would the accountability look like? What would the scorecards, what would the equipping, what would the conversation be if those workplaces were not distractions from the church, but extensions of the church? Not just funders of ministry, but actually the recipients of and the target of ministry. That is what begins to change things. And so classic categories, what are ideas I think I'd encourage you in your cities to begin to engage the business leaders in your existing congregations. If there are already kind of business groups, whether C12 or others in your cities, that think about how to change the conversation. It'd be to, first of all, don't assume that even the man or woman who's passionate about ministry in their business themselves actually has a good marriage. That artificial buoyancy thing is a toxic cover that has got to be pierced, and there needs to be means of helping surface that in a constructive way. So don't assume that the person writing you a check isn't actually the person who needs to be served. Second, how do you begin to help them think about their workplace as a marriage initiative venue? And third, the last 3 years has seen a surge of overall engagement, the idea of mental health, addressing isolation and loneliness and all these themes of relational well-being in businesses. And your church or your marriage initiative or your counseling center may actually get to partner with how to bring those resources into that workplace, or how to be a sponsored partner that they can direct employees to. Thinking about talking to the company locally and around the country, we send hundreds of people to family life events, to local marriage seminars, to offering premarital courses to employees, to bring folks in to do skill workshops and lunch and learns and breakfast studies, to even offer assessment tools like Prepare and Rich and other related instruments to foster and make it normative to get help in your marriage, to get help in your family. The content we're sharing with you, from the slide deck to the curriculum pieces to the tools, take that, give that away, use that. It's got footnotes of all sorts of studies. It's got examples that have been tried and tested in businesses. You can give that to anybody. And I would love to see a marriage renaissance happen, because leaders like you are working with leaders in business around the nation to turn workplaces into a venue for marriage ministry. And so I'm going to leave some time for Q&A. I've thrown a lot at you. I hope that wasn't too fast, but I hope it's got your heart racing a little bit about a whole new frontier right in your backyard, where we can change the story and narrative on marriages.
Well, thank you so much, Mike, for sharing your insights with us. The content that you provided here today is so valuable to our CMI leaders, and I am confident that we're going to be going back to the recording and rewatching over again just to soak it all in. So thank you once again. And we do want to dive into our Q&A session. And so if you have a question for Mike, please raise your virtual hand. You can find the reactions option and at the bottom of your screen, and once you click on that, you'll see a range of emojis there, and just below the emojis you'll spot the raise hand button. So we're going to go ahead and start with Tom. I see you have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you very much, Mike. Boy, you generated about half dozen questions. So I'm curious, a couple questions. How do you approach business owners? Do you approach them on the marriage issue, or or is it more effective to do it on a relationship development basis in the workplace? And I'm wondering, where can CMIs plug in? Can they, not only from the standpoint of engaging business owners, but also being involved with these groups? If we're running and developing our own organizations, they may not be businesses, or is this not the venue for engaging and developing ourselves even?
You can't so in our so there's obviously a ton of variety to the cities here and the models and what exists there, but like in our program, 6% of our members happen to be NGO leaders. So we've got NGOs running everything from food banks to homeless centers to academies and such. So yeah, if it's a sizable one, it could be engaged for personal development. But I would encourage, I think the same issue, well, actually, you know how easy it is to get pastors to launch programs at churches. It's pretty easy to go engage, just get things launched and moving pretty quickly. So some similar dynamics of getting a business owner who's never even thought about this. So at least pastors generally have a pre-existing conviction of, yeah, that's one of the things we should be doing. I just don't got time for that. This isn't even on the radar of should be doing for most business owners. So there has to be a non-presumptive of awareness piece. I think like the brilliance of what Carl helped us do in the context of our city was to create a gathering. Say, hey, we're gonna have a marriage author come. We're just some education. You'll get some things that could be helpful for your marriage. We'd love to talk about things in your business. Came and helped begin to educate on reality. Frankly, most of the people there who were pro-church, pro-marriage, pro this, were like oblivious to these statistics and rates. And then it was like, gosh, I mean, I'm running an engineering company. What am I supposed to do about that? Okay, well, what can you do and what can we do? Because you're not asking, just like you're not going to church telling the senior pastor they need to now run a marriage ministry and talk about marriage every Sunday and personal, like you're saying, release this in your congregation. The same conversations happen with the business owner of, hey, I'm not saying Mr. Construction Company or Miss Physical Therapy Clinic, you're now supposed to become the marriage minister, but how do you be a champion for this? How do you begin to crack this open? And where are your biggest needs that we can help you with? And the cool thing is it's generally low-hanging fruit. So things like, hey, do you have employees that you know are absent due to marriage issues and family issues? Have you seen people wrestling with depression, mental health? Have you had here's some of the things that you may be experiencing in your business that we may actually be able to help you with existing community resources. And if you can get a couple early wins, then just celebrate them. And if you've ever read Don Miller's The Story Brand, one of the big ideas, you want to be the guide, the aid, and make them the hero. So I said the other key thing is celebrate business owners or business people who do anything that wins, because that'll help encourage other people to join them in that winning trajectory.
Thank you.
Great. I see next we have Jim with his hand raised. Jim, do you have a question for Mike?
Okay, so I'm just curious, is there an easy way to find out if there's a C12 group in our area? Are they listed on your website, or is there another way to find out? I'm not aware of any in our area. But
where are you?
That doesn't surprise me. We're in Albany, Corvallis area in Oregon.
Yeah. So in Oregon, I know we've got them down in the Bedford area in Southwest Oregon. We're in Portland. We're up in the Vancouver's across the river into Washington, and we're a little bit south of Portland. So those three areas kind of primarily, and then we're crossover in the Idaho area and such. But yeah, if you go to joinc12.com and say find a forum, you can type in a city or a state or a zip code, and it'll show you within distance like who the leaders are, and you can contact if we're in a city, we've got a full-time leader then, and so you can reach out to that person. And this is a universal passion point within our network of coaches and chairs, so that they'll be the people that most conspire with locally.
Thank you.
Yep. It's the website, I'll put it in the chat. It's joinc12.com. Someone just was asking that. www.joinc12.com. Do find a forum piece on the top, and that will show you all the geographies.
Okay, great.
Oh,
And I'll post that in our Slack workspace as well, so everybody can access that link there if you didn't grab it. Next, we have a question from Carl.
Yeah, Mike, tell everyone a little bit about what is a chair? What's a C12 chair? Give them kind of a little bit more information about who these people are and how they're rooted in the community, and how they can connect these marriage leaders to the broader network of business leaders they serve.
Absolutely. So in our model, one of the things that's unique, there's a lot of different programs out there for helping Christian business owners or the people in business. One of the distinctives of our approach is that we have these full-time people called a chair, and it's their full-time job. They're typically people who have owned or led businesses before, or maybe came out of like an executive pastor role, and they've made it their full-time job to facilitate 3 to 5 monthly forum gatherings, and then do one-on-one coaching and mentoring with 30, 40, 50 leaders themselves. And then they're actively connecting in the community. And so in some cities, we may only have one. In other cities, we may have 8, 9, 10 chairs working on a team together. But they're usually very, very, very involved in the local church. They're working across the city. They are typically going to be meeting with, a couple hundred business leaders a year, as they're constantly getting the right people in and figuring out who should be in places. And so they've got usually a breadth of perspective. Can also help share with you if you want to the first question Tom asked, where do I start? Well, the chair could tell you, hey, I've got most members talking with this felt need, or they're experiencing this pain point, and could even be the people who help partner with you to put on a seminar or a breakfast, or bring you in to speak at a lunchtime, and explore all those pieces. And so our representation varies a lot by market. So we've got markets where there's literally hundreds of members in one MSA, and we got markets where we may be newer and only got a couple dozen. But the local chair is going to be a key person to help partner with you in exploring those things in our context. But if you go to other cities where we're not, there's usually if you were to Google Christian CEO groups or Christian business groups and figure out if there's anything like that in your area, this is one of the least developed frontiers of local church, parachurch business collaborations in most cities. You have a lot of stuff on youth, you have a lot of stuff on poverty and church planting and evangelism, very, very little in terms of mature collaboration around marriage. So I think it's a blue ocean opportunity. Because here's the other cool difference, that if you've ever tried to do marriage ministry in a church, one of the challenges you got is you're competing for that little bit of time that people come on campus. And how do you get it on Sunday morning or Wednesday night, or do you get them come back? And everyone's competing for a very thin slice of their calendar. In the workplace, people are there 40, 50 hours a week. And so when marriage ministry happens at work, there's no drive time. There's no another place. The workplace can do so many things during the day, and then connect things to folks who are not going to your church, but are looking for help, that it becomes a totally different set of math of what's possible.
Oh, that's awesome. Love hearing that. Okay, so next we have a question by Jim. Jim, you can
Mike, I think I'm still.
Oh, you're good.
Still live, yeah. So if what would be the one resource, book, podcast, whatever, that you think would be the next step for us to read, watch, listen to help us think how to do this?
A good question, Jim. Well, I think from a podcast to begin thinking about the conversation points, my friends at Faith Driven Entrepreneur have a pretty good podcast that pretty frequently will address the marriage of leaders and relational issues there. That's probably a good public domain podcast and website to get into the conversation stream, and even be able to reference things you find on there with folks. And then I think if you read the 2 segments or 2 curriculum sets, you're going to get PDFs to a workplace ministry, and you go look at the footnotes there, and just become conversant in the business outcomes and impact struggles that connect to relationships and marriage issues, to where you can connect those dots. Then you'll be well poised to have disruptive conversations with business leaders.
And I did share all of those resources with you in our promo email, but I'll also share them out in our post email, just with all of this information, so you have that. And it looks like up next we have a question from Bruce Wilbanks in Tulsa.
Yes, hi, Mike. I do have a question. You just talked about the share of the week. They're at work 40, 50 hours a week, but at the church, you have an opportunity to get both spouses there. Is there an opportunity at work? Have you seen that, where they might invite the spouse in for a lunch or something like that? How have you seen that work?
Great question, Bruce. Yeah, that's definitely a disadvantage of the workplace. So I would say predominantly what we end up seeing in terms of workplace delivered marriage experiences, helping the one person, but even challenging the ability to have resources they can take back. Like a lot of our businesses will deploy Right Now Media or chaplains or other things to encourage taking things back into their homes. We do see some that will offer lunchtime seminars, or more is going to come around doing something at work that gets the employee engaged and caring and some felt needs being met. And then saying, hey, out of the energy of that, what if we as a company sponsor going to that seminar being hosted by the local marriage show on Friday? Or, hey, there's a conference coming up. We're going to allow, like, one of our company benefits is we'll pay for you and your spouse to go to Family Life We Can Remember, or an equivalent type experience. The workplace engaging, even if it's just one of the spouses, in a regular conversation around this and debugging the shame or the embarrassment of needing help, then allows that person to be a champion to get their family engaged. If they're part of a church, then they just engage it there. If not, it becomes a way to say, let us help you get involved in something.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Now next we have a question from Tom Prichard.
Yes, you've generated some more questions on my part. One thought is, when you do the survey of CEOs and ask them how their marriage is, I would almost think if you could get to the wives and ask them, because I know men oftentimes think, oh, my marriage is doing great.
What?
Doing better.
You think men inflate their scores?
Yeah.
So,
I from personal experience.
Well, can I
but,
speak to that real quick? Because
yeah.
so something we've done that is actually really messy in our program for CEOs, particularly once a year, you actually do this kind of deep dive business review process. And we added to it about 10 years ago, 11 years ago, doing a 360 with your executive team. So we'd ask your executive team, like, how's Tom doing and how's the business doing? And then we added, really as a spontaneous idea, when you're interviewing the spouse, well, we started asking the spouse questions like, well, how's Tom's leadership? How's his leadership at home? How can he better love you? How's his work-life balance?
Yeah.
That was so explosive in insight that it became a new normal. So about 40% of our markets will actually do a 360 on the leader, where we ask the spouse without that person present. I had mine yesterday. So for the last 10 years, my wife has once a year been interviewed by my forum. In fact, for about 3 months leading up to that date, she's always like, are we going to talk about this issue and fix it, or should I tell your group? Because if I tell them, they'll get all over you.
Yeah. Well, okay. And then the other question I have, are there examples of businesses who are doing this really well? I have a friend in Michigan whose company hired a counselor to actually be an employee. And then he talked about an organization, I think it was down in Texas, down south, maybe it was Louisiana or someplace, where they're actually doing a ministry to help businesses do this internally. And I can't remember the name of that company.
There's a great organization. So about 34%, roughly 33.8% of our companies will have professional third-party chaplaincy provided to their employees. The two largest operators of those types of things is a group called Marketplace Chaplains, based out of Dallas, Texas. They've got about 2,000 chaplains, and then a group out of North Carolina called Corporate Chaplains of America. Those are really the two national providers that do send clergy straight into workplaces to provide 24/7 EAP access, but from a Christian perspective.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Does anyone else have any questions for Mike before we go ahead and move on?
I see Ann McKenna, but it's not Ann. But I see.
Okay, yeah, I see Bill. Yes, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, Mike, a question. I think you said in the beginning you had over 3,000 members as part of C12.
About 4,000, just about, yeah.
Now, are there a lot of women CEOs as well?
Yeah, about 14% of our CEOs are women, and about 30%. We have two programs. We have one program for owners and CEOs, and we have a program called Key Players for like vice presidents and C-suite members of those companies. So 30% of those are women. 14% of our CEOs are women.
Do you find one group that does better with all this than the other?
I mean, yeah, so women are usually naturally better at us than most things, but particularly on caring about the full balance of life perspective. So yeah, I'd say to Tom's early point, most are we actually will tell men will rate their stuff. And if they rate it 9, we generally say, if you rate yourself like 8 or above, we really love you to ask your wife to score it before our next meeting. And then they usually come back like, one's like, I was on a meeting where we did that. And first, like, I'm just text my friend right now. Hey, if you had to rate our marriage on a 1 to 10, or at least my part of it, what would you rate it? And he said, and he done an 8 and he got back 3. He's like,
That sounds familiar.
guys, I'm not sure what to do. I'm afraid to go home now. What do you mean a 3? I thought we're pretty good. Yeah. So women are usually more self-aware.
Great. Thanks for your question. Anyone else have any questions before we move on? All right. Well, up next, we're excited because we're going to get to hear from Bruce Wilbanks. And if you haven't yet met Bruce, he and his wife, Lita, they lead the Tulsa Marriage Initiative. And Bruce has extensive experience in marketplace connections. He's been an executive recruiter and career life coach for professionals and executives for the majority of his 40+ years of business experience. So, Bruce, whenever you're ready.
All right, thank you, Steph. Yeah, I just want to add a few other things, just kind of from background. I've been the state president of our trade association 2 different times, and as I said, I've worked with executives nearly my entire career, and these are people that are at the upper echelons of corporate accounting departments, VPs of finance, CFOs, controllers. And then also partners and senior managers at the big accounting firms. The companies that I've worked with have been small, medium size, and even the largest Fortune 50 companies, some of the largest companies in the world. And what I've noticed and had many times is people come to me and say, Bruce, I don't want to be on this career path that's going to take me to partner or that's going to take me to the controllership or the CFO position in this company, because all the people I know that have been in those positions are divorced. And I don't want to lose my family over this. And so they're coming, they were seeking advice from me how to move their career into a position that would be more family friendly. And it's not just the employees. There are owners, business owners, typically of the smaller to medium-sized companies that are Christians that want their employees to do well, both at home and at work. And so there is definitely a market out there, and there are people out there that want this. Some numbers that I saw a recent article on LinkedIn that Harvard Business Review studied the various ways divorce impacts the workplace, and they found that divorce costs American businesses as much as $150 billion per year. And if you start just calculating in stress and the other things that it throws in there, mental health issues, it could be up to $300 billion a year. You know, some of the things that are affected when people get divorced. The average employee that's going through divorce loses 168 work hours during the year through having to do legal proceedings and things like that. And then you can add on top of that, working their schedule to help get kids sick days and things like that, get them to school and those sorts of things. It can really skyrocket from there. Some other things that people don't really equate, even though they're at the office, they're still losing productivity because they have a lack of focus. They're thinking about relational issues with their spouse. They have increased, because of that, they may have increased errors and accidents, and that contributes to lost revenue for the company. And it could even be more severe than that. But they're distracted and it may cause them to make poor decisions. And so it can be very, very costly. I saw one number that the return on investment for every dollar put into relational, helping maintain good relational health with your employees, the return on investment is 6.8 times. So for every dollar spent, you're going to get back almost $7. And so from an income or an economic standpoint, this is good for business. And you can even approach businesses from that perspective if they're not, even if they don't have a great passion for helping their employees. Look, you can just say, look, this is a moneymaker for you. And so me and another fellow here in Tulsa that had very big recruiting business. We tried to work together on a career coaching business, and I insisted that we do the relational part of it. He really didn't want to do that, so we kind of set that aside. But I think there's definitely a huge market for that in any city that you're in, because companies are experiencing these issues that Mike talked about, where their employees, they're surprised to find out that their employees are getting a divorce. And as I mentioned, when I asked the question of Mike earlier about whether you get the spouse at work or not, we all know that one spouse can make a difference in a relationship for the negative. You know that hot button you can push on your spouse right now that would cause them to have a bad day. And so if that can happen, then one spouse can make a difference for the positive in a relationship as well. So even though only one spouse is perhaps at these functions, it does, like Mike said, it normalizes the issue and creates opportunities to engage a spouse in other ways. One of the things we lead re-engage at our church, we've done it for about 5 or 6 years now. And we always do a rate your marriage at the beginning of it, and we have them rated again at the end. But at 95% of the time, the husband rates their marriage higher than the wife does. And we just started a group of people this last night or Wednesday night. Same thing happened. All the men rated their marriage is better than their wife rated it, and often by 2 or 3 points. So. And then one other thing that I would mention is marriage and relational issues are actually something that men will talk about in the workplace, because they've already talked about they're having problems with their wife. They're possibly, maybe getting separated, maybe getting a divorce. But when they have an opportunity to improve that relationship, then they'll share that information at work. Their buddy says, "Hey, John, I thought you guys were going to get a divorce." "Oh man, no, you should have seen, we did this and it really helped. We were going to," and they'll actually discuss those things. And so the workplace is a very open place for men to have those kinds of conversations that they may not have any place else. So that's kind of what I had to add, Steph. I hope that was helpful.
Yes, thank you so much, Bruce, for your insights and for sharing your experience. It was such a valuable addition to our discussion today. So thank you. We loved hearing from you. And coming up next, we have the privilege of hearing from Carl Caton. And most of you know Carl, but if you haven't had the privilege of meeting him, Carl's the president and founder of Marriage Initiative, and he's really the driving force behind all of this. And so, Carl, whenever you are ready.
Thank you, Stephanie. Well, I don't know if I'm the driving force, but I've been on a ride with a lot of great people for a lot of years. And Mike Sharrow is one of these young men that I just love and appreciate and admire so much. His authenticity of who he is thank you so much for your friendship. And Mike and I have been kind of exploring this together, as he said, for the last 9 or 10 years. And I would really encourage you to reach out to your C12 chairs and build relationships there. The other thing that I want to share with you before we sign off is Stephanie will share with you a document called Relational Wellness in the Workplace. And this was created by a really dynamic young man, Matt Turvey, who Mike knows, and others. And this is a really well done document that's something you can hand off to a business leader. One of the challenges is Mike and I and others have explored this in San Antonio, is that a lot of times business leaders are not sure if, number one, they're qualified, or if it's appropriate. Is it appropriate to talk about marriage in the workplace? Because a lot of times the pushback business leaders get is like, wow, that's a really private matter, and we don't want to be talking about our marriages in the workplace. And so this document, Relational Wellness in the Workplace, will help you. It'll help you help business leaders. Number one, it will help you demonstrate to business leaders that yes, there are ways that you can approach relational wellness. You may not want to talk about it in the context of marriage, but relationships are important to all of us. And we even have business relationships. And so for a business leader to invest in helping people develop their relationship skills, that's very appropriate for the workplace setting. So we'll be sharing that document with you. And again, hope you'll reach out and meet your C12 chair in your community or a community nearby. And let's continue to explore and press in on how we can learn more about working in the workplace. So one other thing before we sign off, I just want to mention, this is a complete aside, is that I know that many of you know that we're working for our upcoming National Marriage Week 2024, and we're working with Brad Wilcox, a very dynamic author. Brad was quoted in a New York Times article today that I think you'll find just stunningly positive, talking about the happiness factor and how marriage is the most correlated aspect to people's personal happiness. So I hope you'll take that in sometime soon. I think you'll be really encouraged. I truly think we're on the beginning of a marriage renaissance, and having dynamic leaders in local communities on the ground working in this area as America and as families begin to place a higher emphasis and value on marriage is an exciting place to be. So thank you all for the amazing work you're doing. And Stephanie, I'll pass it back to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Carl, so much for sharing that with us today. And we know that, we've come to the end of our hour. So if you need to hop off, that's perfectly fine. We understand. And we will be recording and putting this entire recording on YouTube, so you can go back and watch if you have any questions. But we would like to just ask if anybody has any last questions that they would like to ask any of our three speakers today. And if so, if you just raise your virtual hand, we'll go around and address those questions. Do we have any more questions in the room, or did you all? Okay, I see Dennis has a question. Dennis, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, for Bruce, you quoted two articles, one from Harvard Business Review on the cost of divorce, and the other was one that you talked about with the 6.8 times return. I'm wondering if you could maybe do maybe send out to all of us if you have copies of those reports, that would be great, or just the information on how we might be able to find those, because those sound like very interesting.
Yeah, I can follow up with that and get that to you. I don't have the source right here in front of me, just the notation about it, but I will document that, get that out to Stephanie, and she can get it to everybody.
Yep, sounds good. I'd love to do that. I see that Mike also said that the data is included in the marriage ministry and the workplace curriculum piece with the footnotes of the source and the research there. And I'll be sharing those back with you again as well. I see it looks like, Dennis, you have your hand raised again.
Well, actually, just a comment. What wasn't mentioned on intro to Mike was that Mike was actually on the board of directors of San Antonio Marriage Initiative for quite a few years. So Mike, it was great seeing you again in this context. You did a great job, and just kudos to you for all the work you've been doing to support Christianity, Christian leadership, and of course, marriage ministry. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Dennis.
Yes, for sure. And I see, Tom, you have your hand raised.
Yes, another question. And I guess I could throw this open to Carl, Bruce, or Mike. The Community Marriage Initiative talks about community, and obviously we're emphasizing church, because I think that is a primary ministry of calling of the church, is to strengthen marriages and families. But I'm wondering, as we see the changing cultural dynamics, people don't go to church, that we need to go into the community, or frankly, to engage a lot of people. If our community marriage initiatives, should there be a percentage allocation between church and business, in terms of, if we want to have an overall impact on our communities, what percent of our activity might, I would think it'd still be majority percent would be church, but is there a percent that should be maybe focused on the business leaders, pastors, but then also business leaders who have great influence? So I'm curious your gentlemen's thoughts on that.
I don't have a metric for you, but I do think I I like to debunk the separation of marketplace from church and believe like we're talking about Christians, in business is just the church deployed. But I think if you look at any of our cities on this webinar right now, less than 10% of any of our cities are churched. If we think about percentage of the population attending church on a regular basis, and you can get to that just by looking at raw seating capacity of your churches compared to the MSA population, and just go, the math says they may identify with the church, they may even give to a church, but they're not going to that church very often. But if we look at the percentage of the city that is touched by people who do go to church, that is massive. And so for me, the script flipping is less, how do I get the whole city to show up at church, but how do I get the whole church to show up at the city? Kind of the Lausanne mantra, and view that as kind of two stages of the same thing. And it actually begins to make the church as an equipping center versus just as a teaching center more relevant to the city, and actually helps it be a resource center for those needs and issues. So again, I'll let Bruce may have brilliance on the percentages, but I think thinking about those not being totally separate, but really being kind of extensions of each other is helpful for me.
Yeah, I don't have any percentage numbers, but I do know that especially with all of the emphasis on mental health and relational health that we see, not only through our ministries, but you can see it on television. You know, they'll have a whole episode based on how mental health is something you need to get taken care of, and it's a real talking point now in society. So that opens the door even further for work with these businesses. And I know in dealing with the companies and the professionals that I dealt with, that it's a real felt need for them. And the companies that I've visited with, and it hadn't been too many since we started the marriage initiative, they've had a very kind of receptive attitude about it. And I think it's going to be fairly, as I pursue it a little bit more. And I love your model, Mike. I think I want to check into that and see if there's any C12 here in Tulsa. But there's Christian Businessmen Association that they have luncheons, and some other organizations like that we're getting involved with that I think can have a real impact as well. And of course, we're mostly from the marriage perspective, but any relationship, as you said, you know, there are relationships and companies, or maybe Carl said this, that we have with customers and clients and other employees and staff and peers and bosses. Those are all relationships that could improve. And so I think there's a real market there.
Yeah, the one thing that I'll add to that is that what our experience was in San Antonio is that we were working with a lot of churches, and we were, you know, when our experience working with churches, you kind of have to give everything away, and everything's about the lowest possible cost. And one of the things that surprised us about working with businesses is that a lot of them work with a much higher level of excellence and scale. And we found that business leaders desired things that were done with greater excellence, but they were willing to pay for it. That was the big difference, is that business leaders, they have the capacity to do things at scale, and they have the capacity to pay for things. And so we were not equipped well enough. I don't think we did a good enough job to do things more at scale and with greater excellence. So that's the difference in church and business for us.
Carl, a follow-up question. I've always thought, I've been thinking, should we be able to monetize? Is there a way to monetize some of our marriage initiative activity? Like you're saying, churches are probably not going to pay for something, but is that a vehicle to work with businesses to provide, you know, professional or quality relationship development skills, or marriage or family? Is that something that could be monetized, turned into a business almost?
I think we had an opportunity to do some lunch and learns that were paid for. So I think businesses are very generous to pay for people to come and deliver some real value.
Mike, would you like to speak to that? I see you have dropped some comments there.
Yeah, I was the wonderful, refreshing piece when you begin to work with businesses, they're not looking for what's the cheapest thing I can get. They're looking for value. And so we pay for value. We pay We pay for employee education, we pay for skill building, we pay for lots of things. And so what we're looking for is solutions. And if you got a solution, we want to pay for that. And simple things. We're not looking for discounts to how to get someone to you heard Bruce talk about those stats earlier. The cost of a marriage crumbling is so big on an employer. Paying $75 or $300 to go to that marriage retreat or that marriage seminar, that is not the price tag issue. They're not needing a 50% off coupon. They're wanting to know, will this help my employee come back and be a better worker, have a better family? Will it solve a problem? And so offering, I know in Austin, Texas, a number of businesses who've hired, care coaches who can come in and say, hey, once we work, we're going to come and facilitate conversations. What employees do want is anonymity. Carl mentioned there is that the tension of, they probably don't want to talk about the reason my marriage is falling apart is because of this addiction I have or this financial impropriety I have or whatever issue. So there's that confidentiality of, I don't want to probably tell the boss my issue, but I'd love to have ability and have access to someone who can help me with that issue. And that does not need to be something you're draining donor dollars for, I think. And I think, frankly, when you get small impact, the willingness, like the business owners who went to that luncheon with Carl and I 10 years ago, everyone with their employers, like, you ever want counseling? You want to get married? Like, I will, best money I ever spent. If I can spend a couple $100 and see someone's marriage change, like, talk about an ROI and then the goodwill, and never thought about all the derivatives of that. So yes.
And I might add, I just did a quick calculation for an employee that makes $50,000 a year. If they miss 168 hours of work during the year, that's over $4,000 that it costs the company. So return on investment is out of the roof.
And then there's the other part of there's absenteeism, there's presenteeism. There's they're at work, they're dead at their desk because they're dreading going home, and they're calling divorce attorneys from their desk, and they're navigating child support and child logistics. I mean, they're at work, but they ain't there.
Right.
So true. Mike, we have a question here in the chat, and someone has asked if you would please repeat the line again that you said, the church as an equipping center versus, and then they put ... They didn't get the end of that.
Yeah. And I stole that from Dave Rhodes, Kelly Canwisher, and Will Mancini in a book called Future Church. But the idea of, is the church fundamentally a teaching center, a place where you go to get content and religious experience, which is increasingly a pretty competitive spot because I can get the world's best content on YouTube any day? Or is the church primarily a teaching, equipping center that equips you for life outside of those gatherings? And when the ask is not, hey, I'm trying to guilt you into coming to church, tell my employees, hey, would you come to church so you can feel like you're satisfying some angry God or you're religiously a better person, but more of a, hey, there's a resource to a need you have, and I want to help you go there because it's going to help you be a better mother, father, husband, wife, deal with conflict, deal with money issues. I've got a publicly traded secular company that partnered with my church to say, hey, we've got employees making stupidly high wages that are still bankrupt, and I can't pay them out of their stupidity. Can I pay for them to take financial peace instead of giving them more raises? And they're like, all day long, I'll pay $150 for that Dave Ramsey kit if you can help my employees start learning how to like budget and save their money. And so when the church can become a resource partner to solving problems unapologetically with the gospel, that's a pivot to being a training center, an equipping center versus just a teaching center.
Yeah, that's awesome. Love that.
I have no passion on the subject. Can you tell, Carl?
Just a little bit, huh? All right. Well, does anyone else have any questions before we conclude our session today? All right. Well, it looks like we have come to the end of our training event on Marketplace Connections. And once again, we want to thank you guys for joining us. And we hope that you enjoyed the training, and we hope that it was beneficial to your teams. I'm sure that it was. I will be sending out all of these resources. I've got a whole list here of resources I'll be sending you, and don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything at all that we can do to support you. And you guys have a great weekend. Goodbye.